being recorded.
We're being recorded by some program on the internet. Go figure.
Yeah.
So like late. Like I'm not impressed. Neither is the White Rabbit, but I'm definitely going to forgive you because mutual person who brought us together. Actually, you know, he runs on his own time. I won't mention his name yet, but he runs on his own time. So if I said like 4:30 or 5 o'clock, he'd be like 6 or 5:30 or 6 o'clock. You know, you just add an hour, you get used to it.
For sure, totally. I still have this thing where, you know, I did the thing for advertising for a while, and like this was 10 years ago. And so when they started talking about the idea of even having like video calls and shit like that, it was like, yeah, no, it's still space age shit. And then as soon as I started doing it the first couple times, man, I don't know, it tripped me the fuck out. Like, what the fuck?
It still kind of does, right? I was watching like Back to the Future 2 when they had the video phone. It's like on the wall, and like you walk up,
for sure.
And then it's like, well, now we just carry ours around. But
yeah, I was also like, I'm back to like Dick Tracy comics. You know what I mean? Like the fucking watch. I'm like, okay. And now they have the fucking watch, and like it's in a whole conversation about what it is about like does art imitate life, or does life imitate art, or like where technology, where that goes, and how that's. I've been watching that for like, well, I mean, 10 years anyways. Before that, I was just like, yeah, it's obvious this is where it's going for sure. That's where it's going. And they're like, well, maybe it's possible. I'm like, you fuckers are totally doing this. Like, as soon as the military's done with it, they're like, everybody gets it, and we all get to play with it after that.
I think it's a kind of a general rule that if they tell us that they've got this technology, they've probably had that technology for a while, and they're just letting us know about it now. But
finally like, oh yeah, okay, civilians, check out this fun toy we check this out. A couple of years ago, one just on that point, there was when I was up in Alberta, I can't remember what I was watching, but there was two articles that were like super interesting that were really closely, and CBC was about the only thing it had out there. And anyways, they were talking about this thing called Project Vulcan that was basically, that's pretty common now. No, it's not still common now. But anyways, what it was a program put forward by University of Alberta in basically what it was a video game that used reading, like using a helmet, read, you know, current from your brain that would allow you to maneuver things through a 3D space in a video game. This video game, Project Vulcan. Anyways, so the point was this, the video game was you put the helmet on and you spend about 45 minutes calibrating your whatever, you know, signals are being sent from your brain. And they ask you to do things like look up, down, side to side, and a couple of other functions. There was some emotional quotient part of it as well too. And basically the first level of this fucking video game was you go onto a spaceport and there's all these malfunctioning robots, and you possess the robots and you take over their bodies and they do things to stop the other robots. And they're like putting this on the radio, and I'm like, okay, I was stone cold sober those years when I was out there, and I'm like, this is fucked. This is fucking crazy. This is the video game you attach to controlling brainwaves? Okay, right on. The other one was at that same year, there was that guy that had at the wrist amputation that it was all it wasn't self-contained, but they built this guy an arm, and it's attached to the forearm, and there's all the computers, you know, set up to monitor everything as it was pretty, you know, it was still in its startup phase. But basically what they had in the sensors in the hand were pressure and temperature. And so those sensors were hooked up to implants inside the arm that basically bypassed the amputation that would go directly to the brain where those signals were. And so this guy did a whole blindfold test using those things. And it was like, this guy's like picking up things like an egg or a cup of coffee. And the fucking thing is telling his brain that it's an egg and that's a hot cup of coffee, blindfolded, right? In Italy at the same time. And I'm like, you know, I was at the time, I'm like, I'm sitting out there in the middle of fucking nowhere in a frozen over industrialized hellhole, and I'm like listening to this shit. It was like it was one step up from watching too many TED Talks that were like a year or 5 old, where like they still really haven't done anything with it, but this shit was current at the time. I'm like, this is fucked. And now here I'm doing a podcast on video.
Right? It's it's like the way it's gradually come out. We've kind of just adopted things as it's come, and because we have done that, nothing's really surprising us anymore. But just imagine if they did just drop on us smartphones back when we had like the fucking briefcase in the car. Remember the briefcase in the car? Like, if someone at that point in time was just to hand you like, you know, the iPhone for today. Look, I don't even know. I'm talking on it.
Just staring right into it.
We would be like, "What the fuck is this?" And we're like, "What planet did you come from?" Like,
totally.
You guys have flying cars, right?
Totally. It doesn't give you it gives you a different kind of cancer now too. So like, it's like, you know, we just haven't found what it does just yet, but we're going to use the fuck out of it for sure. We will.
Oh no, we've rebranded all of the side effects of the technology.
These are now seen as a positive. It's a strict
we now call it the joy, which is what I call the affliction that's going around in the world. Is the joy. And there's people who get lollipops for their joy, and then people who remain sugar free. Right. And so, yeah, I think the side effects of like all of this technology is actually what they're calling the joy. They're like, this shit's making people sick. We need something to cover it up. I got an idea. Let's release joy from a lab somewhere. We'll blame it all on that. But I'm kidding. Get 5G conspiracy people. I'm kidding. It's a joke. I don't really mean this.
Full disclosure. We should have put that thing at the beginning, like the views shared in this video are not those of the broadcaster.
There's a constant disclaimer on this channel, guy. Like, you have no idea. Yeah, sometimes the conversation ends up being in the woods with Sasquatch. We really have no guidelines, or we have no bumpers here. You know, it's bumper cars without bumpers.
I'm actually like, I'm just about far enough in country, deep rural British Columbia right now that if they do send somebody to knock on the door, this will be already done by then. It'll be fine. Like, I'll get the knock the second I press done. It'll just be like knock, knock, knock. I'm like, you fuckers took your time. What's going on in Shane's world these days, man? It's been a fucking long time.
Oh man, well, I mean, it's been a long time. Obviously, we kept doing the mine site thing for a long time, as you know, and that turned also into me with unraveling with Lenny's younger brother Shane.
Yeah,
Farmer. We started doing an unraveling. Yeah, I mean, I've done an abundance of shit, and life has gone on, but I don't think much has changed. Let's put it that way.
Nice. Slowly grinds forward, but doesn't go anywhere. I love it. Yeah, that's pretty much that's life. Until you're in the dirt, that's what you get.
Oh, it reminds me of you know, the Anne Rice books where the vampires talk about, and rest in peace, Anne Rice, where they talk about you don't really change over thousands of years. You just become more like yourself. You know, and I think that's kind of true in a lot of ways, right? It's like. Yeah, a lot of things you maybe when you were younger you hadn't quite figured them out yet, but they were there, and you know, you kind of grew into them, kind of like a nose.
What's it? Are you? You're not in Muskoka right now. You're in Toronto.
Toronto, yeah, been in Toronto about 10 years now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I was just wondering about that because, you know, like this is obviously a super interesting conversation. So I'm not going to get into like the whole bullshit about, you know, what else is going on right now because it's so fucking polarizing. But anyways, it was interesting when the whole, you know, the pandemic party started 2 years ago, and as soon as it happened within the first couple of months, so it was somewhere around March, like in around that time 2 years ago, and I like being like, you know, it's an avid student of propaganda. I'm like, okay, wow, this is whoa, hey, these guys are like, and there was a part of me that I was like, you know what, I don't care which way this is going, and there was like a sick part in my head where I was like, well, I don't necessarily agree with whatever's going on across the world right now, but fuck, they're doing a really good job. They're like, this is global. This is a big thing. And at the same time, it started to get to me because I was like, because if you listen to certain different media outlets, obviously there's a narrative, obviously there's a bias, and like all things, right? So anyways, as I started to listen to more of it, and I started to, I was like, it seems like there's some local, I guess you could say, like, if you go province to province to province, there's a very different kind of conversation that happens through media outlets insofar as what's being discussed and what's hot topic. And when something like that takes the front line of literally everything, to the point where I listened to the CDC. I was working in a legal grow up during that time, and eventually, well, I was doing that for like about a month, and then when it got to, because you're in a hot, humid environment, right? You're in basically like a tropical garden is what you're in, and with some other people and whatever. And it got to the point I was like, you know what? If this is a thing, this is probably not the thing. We don't want to be fucking close to something like that where there's like there's definitely a transmission threat there if there is such a thing, whatever. But at the same time, within that time, I was already pretty well known for contacting people out of the blue and just being like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Like, I'm talking to you forever and la-di-da-di-da. But now I really had a fucking reason. And so I started contacting a buddy in almost every province of this country. I'm like, what does it look like here? What does it look like there? What does it look like there? And man, there were some fucking crazy stories about just insofar as how things were being handled. And then interestingly enough, in the coming months after that, and it was like, not to go full fucking, like rabbit down the hole kind of thing, but because I don't really totally believe in, I believe in there are obviously plots and ploys that happen everywhere, marketing aside, like if you went into like political parties and all the rest of it. But it was very interesting to see that, at the same time that something that was so widespread and reduced people to staying in their homes or staying in very close areas, that communications went through the roof. And I think about every time somebody like posts something on social media about, whatever their cause or problem that they're trying to get attention to, then ultimately that little piece of information transfer is paying off like a major multinational telecommunications company, right? So every single thing that is done through these things has done that. And right at the same time, everybody started freaking out about 5G. That's like a rollout of being able to handle massive payloads of information all at the same time. And it's interesting to see how that comes into it now, where I always like enjoyed it because as a lover of the art of conversation, that it's come to this point where it's like, okay, wow, there's a shit ton more information and conversation happening between people, where people that on the streets, you don't always see the same kind of thing. It's not like the East Coast where you go out there and you can just, everybody's waving at everybody, they don't even know who they are. Whereas you get into Toronto and things like that, now we have people that are, it's a bit handicapped, but at the same time, there's quite a bit more conversation happening. So you can kind of see it kind of whittling itself down like a second renaissance, as one of my friends would say. It's like we've opened up a new avenue of communication that has definitely benefited. And there are side effects like that. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I could really get into this joy thing, like, right? Give it to me. Fucking plug it in my head. I've been saying that for like a decade. Stop piddling it out in these tiny little packages. Just fucking hand out the implants already. Let's get this party started. But yeah, so what did that look for you in Toronto, like when that thing was going down, like as like musician and doing these things?
I mean, the first couple of weeks, everybody was scared to death, right? And actually, I should say longer than that. Like the first few months, everyone was very scared, and the streets went dead, and everything got quiet. It was very strange. I mean, it's still way quieter than it ever was. Like you're used to like a certain level of noise in the city. Mm-hmm. And I do live like pretty close to downtown, so there's like constantly traffic. There's constantly people. And the traffic dropped by like 50%, like, and never came back, or at least 50% and never came back above that. And like, it's so weird that we see like coyotes on the streets here and shit, because they're like, where are all the fucking people? Like, where?
Oh my God, that's awesome. I mean, for that one thing, I'm so happy.
Yeah, it's been kind of neat. And birds, like you start seeing a shit ton more birds, because it's almost like they're flying around being like, there used to be people here. There's not people here anymore. Let's go check this out. And then they're landing places, and yeah, it's really quite wild in that way. Last summer, I think everything got opened up a little bit too fast, or like, and so like people were still scared, not really going to places. Yeah. And then this most recent summer, because of like they had kind of got used to it a little bit, I think things went back to normal for a little while almost, and then now we're right back to almost square one. It seems like, man, the lineups for COVID testing and third boosters right now just down the street for me are insane. Like, it's longer than back when the lockdown first happened and people were lining up to get into the mall or get into like a grocery store or whatever, and we saw long lineups. I mean, it's Toronto, right? There's lots of people.
Sure.
But this is insanity. Like, it's just like, it's wrapping in two directions around a mall. Like, yeah. I've never seen anything like it. It reminds, I think the best thing, Wonderland. Like, it reminds me of the amusement park at Wonderland.
Joy Park.
Wonderland. So that's it. And the other thing, like, which you don't know, maybe some of the listeners probably do, when lockdown first hit, job was affected, I couldn't work doing what I was doing. One of my roommates actually was working in a long-term care place, and they were having a hard time filling spots because everybody was scared, didn't want to go to work. So I jumped into that right away. Pretty much like a month, 2 months into the pandemic, I started doing that. So in a way, things didn't really change for me. Still kept, doing what I've always done, really. But yeah, now it's getting weird. Like, people are getting squirrely. I'm starting to hear a lot more like yelling at people on the streets. Like, I was mentioning that lineup. Like, you can hear people fighting in the lineup with people on the phone or with each other in the lineup. And I've had people say like things to me because I'm walking past the lineup without wearing a mask. I mean, I'm outside. It's like. Yeah, people are starting to get a little bit more vocal, it seems. I'm starting to see a lot of graffiti where people are like, letting their comments be known that way, right? Yeah. So I don't know, man. Like, and it doesn't seem to be getting better because right now we have all these case numbers going up through the roof here, right? And everybody's threatening to lock it down again. I don't think we have too much longer before they do it.
Yeah, no, I suppose like I said, I was following a lot of things on the news between the different provinces, how they're handling that. And like, I'm in an area right now where, man, we didn't, up until about 2 weeks ago, we are in a pretty small community here that like there wasn't a single case for 2 years. And a lot of people don't really go out. It's a really rural community. A lot of people stick to pretty much, like I said, it's a lot of farming, a lot of local stuff, a bunch of retirees, a bunch of guys our age, guys and girls our age, and people were still traveling out and obviously following some of the rules. But I happen to be, I don't know, for the last 10 years, I'm telling you, man, I have moved away from an area, and within 3 to 6 months, a massive natural disaster has struck the area I was just in. And I wish I was fucking joking about that to sound fucking cool, but we had so we're in British Columbia here. The other two big things that happened this last year, which was kind of interesting to see, was speaking of like resource management. We're in an area like BC caught fire, big fucking time this year. There was a forest fire 20 clicks south of us, and then it was 10, and then it was really like at the edge of it. And there was a place across a river from us. It's a really big river, and these people had one that was like pretty much in their backyard. We were having like, not quite embers, but ash falling down. And at the same time, west of us, getting closer across a couple of ranges, there were like huge, massive evacuations. We had an evacuation order and it lasted about like a week. And there were some people across the water that it lasted like several weeks. But interestingly enough, talk about management of resources. It's on a major highway, and there's a ferry that crosses, a cable-driven ferry. It's quite a long way. And to watch how the province, delegates responsibility to different bodies, and how they're being sent in like they call them the bravest, right? Like, we're walking into like monster, like trees come out of the sky on fire kind of thing. The heat just rips branches off and throws it down out of the sky, and it's like raining firewood is basically what's going on. And totally. And areas like air quality dropping off, and then it's not something that's not uncommon, but it was kind of interesting to see how that was happening in a time where, they're saying there's a pandemic. Let me tell you, that quickly becomes a fucking non-issue when the whole mountain's on fucking fire, man. And I could show you some pictures. Like, I remember the one night it calmed down, and like the air quality was a pretty big issue, but the one night where it really calmed down, and there just happened to be people in town for whatever reason, and there was like a raging Armageddon party out on the beach, and you could just see like fucking kilometers of mountain in either direction completely on fire, less than a kilometer away. And And then there was an interesting conversation that came up out of that about resource management insofar as like when you're in a small community and people are like actually like, hey, we don't want our shit to burn down, but then you get things where, you know, looking at strictly just what was going on, what was being said on the internet, because everybody's checking everything constantly because there's an encroaching disaster, about hazard to say how the province manages things from top to down. So you got at the very bottom, you have people that actually live in one area, and like people are getting burned out of house and home, livestock, everything else, and whatever. In this area and others all over the province, people were like, okay, well, we're going to go in there and start hacking these trees down to stop this from possibly being a thing. And they're being told by other people that you can't do that because there's like a thing between, you know, I think as far up as the crown, but ultimately, you know, it's like you have different parcels of land are owned by a different resource management as well for timber and that industry as a whole. And also they start talking about things like liability. And then this one guy got on and he wrote this whole thing, and people were starting to get pretty pissed because I mean, under that kind of pressure, nobody's really paying attention to a pandemic when there's that kind of thing going on, right? It's like right, clear and present danger is like and also like the smoke, man. It's like it was incapacitating. I've been out a couple of times. Buddies of mine are on the fire team here, helped out here and there and whatever, and those guys went right for it. And then they had to work in concert with these other guys that are coming in, and yeah, that ultimately the whole conversation kind of pivoted on this one guy talking about how I guess his point was, and I don't really side with any of these things. I like to observe these things, read these things. I don't actually have a dog in that fight, so I can just observe what's happening. And having other people that I've known to work in unions and also government offices where they're, you know, that's its own dialogue. But that talking about things like government mismanagement versus union protectivism. So like there's like a handling of a very, very serious life-threatening disaster that's growing. And then at the same time to see like bureaucracy just slow that right down. And in the face of that, I was like looking around and like, you know, the first time it happened, I was like, went over to my buddy's place. He's been out here forever and he's, yeah, pretty hardcore. I'm like, okay, dude, I'm not an alarmist, but like, exactly what are we going to do if shit gets like right next door? He's like, you've got chainsaws, right? I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. He's like, okay, that's what's happening. I'm like, all right, just stick around and wait for that. And meantime, like that. And then after those things, interestingly, I was talking to a good friend of mine out from Wata, and he was telling me about some interesting, he's a master electrician and very interested in some, I guess you could say, conflicting sciences, but interesting stuff about like landslides and things about flooding after forest fires is that fire has like a temperature, but it also has an electrical potential. And so like when you have a forest fire, the electrical potential alters the constitution of the soil and the rocks and all these things around it, and which is why you can see sometimes like when rain comes down, the water won't stick to the dirt. It doesn't absorb into the dirt. And so that's charged in a way. And so shortly thereafter, and I remember him saying that, I was like, wow, forest fires, literally some of the worst that have been seen in this area. BC catches fire every time, but this time it was like a lot of it. And in certain specific areas, when it gets into crevices and stuff like that, that already have water running through it. And then some pretty intense rains, like really intense rain, like fucking the kind of stuff that usually doesn't make it over the mountains. I mean, it's always wet and humid out here and that kind of thing, but this was a little bit more an extra. And it ended up being that landslides happen. It undermines entire hillsides and shit like that. Some of the footage coming back to see that, and now interestingly enough, like I'm sure you guys are probably seeing some things on the news, but again, to speak to, you know, if it's not regionally specific, you might hear a news blurb about it, but you're not going to get the whole story. But like, dude, this shit was like next fucking door, and there's like, you know, fuck, the amount of destruction and infrastructure was incredible. And like now it's down to a choke point, and everything that comes out of Vancouver, from the ports and all the shipping and stuff that comes out of there from major port like Vancouver, and then gets shipped out. And so a lot of things were being brought in from like Alberta, like a lot of those things changed. and a lot of things got really pumped, and it was like moments before Christmas, which is like the biggest capitalist circle jerk of the fucking of the world. There's places that don't even do it that do it. Like, but anyways, so it was interesting to see how that was handled. And there were some reports coming back that again you wouldn't see on media because there's obviously bigger issues at hand. But locally, there were places that were there were reports, anyways, unconfirmed, of course, but like that people were being stopped and handed fines for even trying to pass through a certain area that was just now being opened. And then it was also at the same time because they were also saying that it was this great big fucking a second lock, or I don't even know what the fuck it's like. We're the 20th fucking lockdown out here, right? And so, anyways, and so like they're, you know, whatever offices are at play, it's like making sure at that point, obviously people really do care about personal safety, and obviously that's a huge thing. Military gets involved, and all these other offices are at play. And then unfortunately, I feel like, and it's obvious that, you know, you see it in the media where things are completely sensationalized and blown out of the water because that shit sells, and that's how it's always been. And but on the ground, and hearing stories from people that had gone through there were like some of the most inspiring stories you could fucking think of, like incredible acts of bravery and all this other shit. But you look at the fucking news and they're just like, oh no, you fucking barbarians, like you don't know how to take care of yourselves. We take care of you. Don't fucking forget it. Like, listen, you can't fight that forest fire. No, you may not help your fucking neighbor. Get back in your box. Take a look at the idiot on the screen, the idiot that knows better for you. Go for it. There's the guy for sure. We pay him, you pay him, but technically he works for you. Listen to him, you paid him. Like that kind of narrative starts floating around. So anyways, that's been the last couple of months anyways, prior to obviously this cold snap we're having. Everybody started making jokes about like the plagues. And I was like, you know what? That's all fine and dandy, but you know what the plagues don't have? Flash freezes, because they don't have that kind of temperature in the Holy Land.
Well, I mean, I beg to differ, because I mean, if you look at like any Norse mythology, then you would see like there's a Thimble winter that comes after the destruction of society.
Oh, that's right.
So, I mean, and there's been a lot of people when it comes to the topic of climate change actually say that like it's not so much that things are going to heat up so much as there's going to be a lot of snap freezing, right? Okay. And like that's an alternate theory to what the results of climate change will give. But what are you doing up there? Like, what is it when I say up there? I mean, you're on the other side. People don't really know, if they're not from Canada, like how far away you and I are, even though we're both in the same country. We might as well be on different sides of the planet.
I'm in the southern interior of British Columbia, on the Columbia River. I was out here. I left Cape Breton. As you well know, I travel quite a bit in this country, side to side. I've been doing that actively for the last 20 years. Yeah, lots of that. And then I was doing some things out in Cape Breton with some family there, and then I went out to work in Alberta for a quick spell because I knew a guy there with a pretty sweet into a thing that I didn't have to really get into oil rig culture kind of thing. I could do the job and get in and get out kind of thing. And then when that was done, I happened to be out here. My old man's out here, so that was a pretty easy transition. And we'd been talking about me coming out here for a while, so then we decided to do that. Stayed out for a bunch, and yeah, it was just like getting back into the scene. Then decided that, you know, I was going to try out BC for a while because I haven't done that since like 2013, and before that 2007. But I was always coming back and forth because family and blah. And yeah, after like about a month, I reconnected with a couple of musician friends of mine. This killer drummer and another great organ player, and good friends of mine too. And we had a couple of jam sessions. There was just like it was fucking insanity, man. Like it was acid jazz, and it went on for hours, like just riffing on a couple of riffs and just noise for the sake of noise, but also having some really incredible cohesion going on there. That was just like effortless. And there was a lot of other people involved too. There's a shit ton of musicians out here, like overwhelming amount of them for a small area. And so after that, and getting into a couple other jobs and meeting some other people and being like genuinely inspired and intrigued by I guess the Western culture, but also also like getting that whole, getting back in the dirty parts of farm work, construction, stuff like that was out here. And this is, of course, was like about, yeah, so this would be, I don't know, about half a year or so, almost a year prior to the pandemic striking. So I was like, okay, well, this was like a pretty easy fit. And so I started doing that. And in that time, I did a bunch of, basically had a chance at, after spending a lot of time on the road, there's quite a lot of, there's a division of labor, loss of return on investments if you constantly try to operate several things. And especially if you're operating, if you've got something going on in Cape Breton, something going on in Ontario, and something going on in Alberta, and something going on in BC, that gets fucking timely and extremely expensive and emotionally and intellectually taxing to keep all those things going. And I just did that for long enough that I was like, okay, sit here, and then just kind of go back to the old school of, insofar as all the arts that I was into. So I started avidly pursuing language, communication, but also typography. Not just typography, but like the history of the written word or the spoken word. So we get into like pretty much every continent in the world has some like old religious or theological or philosophical history of spoken word. And then you got, from spoken word, you get into written word. And then you look at languages like Hebrew or Japanese or Chinese, where you have pictograms and imbued meanings, symbols, all that stuff. And I did that pretty avidly for, yeah, almost two years now. Like, and I did that when I was in college for typography, advertising, graphic design, stuff like that. But to be able to sit down and like really look at things and look farther into those, what they mean to the people that they came with. And then of course, naturally, because I started fucking around with shit like chaos magic and stuff like that. I was doing a lot of calligraphy that didn't have any meaning to it whatsoever, but symbolism, things like that, that just imbue more of a feeling, less an actual idea, and doing things like that, and having some like, how do I explain this? Okay, at the end of the day, as often as I love to circle the gaping maw of the abyss, I'm still a realist at the end of the day. Like, there's some things that I've definitely seen and done that I'm like, you know what? There's some hippie somewhere going, it means this, and they're just like trying to put a whole bunch of shit onto it, and which is like totally teach their own, fucking have at her. But for me, I was like almost like, not to try to blow fucking Hunter S. Thompson, but I mean, like, in the sense that I was just kind of like there. I see this thing, I see this scene, but it's really my individual perspective that I'm experiencing. And yeah, I started playing around with concepts and symbolism and just exploring my own kind of way that I'm perceiving these things, and seeing some like pretty incredible, I guess you could say, like coincidences, or just like getting into tune with something that's definitely at play that, I can't say anything else about it really, other than like I've definitely experienced them. There was a couple ones where I had some pretty profound, that was another thing that happened since I came out here. Lucid dreaming, look the fuck out for that shit, dude. It's fucking intense. Like, that is like being awake for like you could have a fucking lucid dream and it could go on for weeks. You wake up and you're like, sometimes you feel like $1,000,000. Sometimes it feels like you've been jumped up and down on. Like, so all those things tied together with those things, it's been good to get off the road and stop for a couple of years. This is the longest I've ever been in a place in my entire life. I've moved almost 2 or 3 times a year for the last 20 years, for fucking sure, like guaranteed. And to be able to sit down, there's things I've remembered and explored that I've had a chance to really delve into it. But the interesting thing about that is that there's something about, they say about like people and go through certain amount of pretty intense scenarios that like you kind of end up compartmentalizing it in order to be able to move forward into the next thing. Survival mode, right? So you don't really fully explore it, but you're doing it in the moment it happens. Like, but you don't always fully remember it, just in the way that the mind handles that kind of shit. And so later on, when you sit there, I'd be doing like fucking nothing, and all of a sudden remember like a series of things. It's just like just like going through. I'm like, holy shit! You know when you do something really awesome, but you fucking forget all about it, and somebody's like, hey, remember that awesome thing you did? And you're like, no. And they're like, you don't? What? That was life altering for me. You don't remember any of that? I'm like, okay. So it's been a lot of that, man. A lot of creative exploration in the things that I have. That on the road, I did things, but I didn't. I was present in the moment, but later on to have a moment to be able to decompress, really open up some of the things I haven't done. So yeah, that's pretty much what the last like 3 years have been for me. Really, that's a lot of art, a lot of music, a lot of fucking hard, brutal work. Yeah, it's definitely being in country and the nature, because I did the Toronto thing. I did the Toronto thing hard. I'm sure you remember. Had a bit of a reputation for doing Toronto.
Doing the Toronto thing.
Toronto remembers me every now and then. I'm like, oh, tell Toronto I said hi, but wink when you do it,
Yeah, I think I was having a conversation earlier today about spirit animals of all things. And then right after I finished the conversation, I thought about this podcast, and I thought about you, and then I was like,
oh yeah,
Coatsworth's spirit animal. And I came up with the Tasmanian devil. And I don't even mean the animal. I mean like the cartoon character, the Tasmanian devil. That's this guy in a nutshell, pretty much. I'm actually quite surprised with how chill you have been during this podcast. Like, right? I'm glad that I'm bringing this up now, and I didn't bring it up at the beginning like I meant to, because you would have made me a liar almost.
Yeah, I know that, right? No, for sure. No, I knew to a certain degree I had to dial a little bit back, but I had played around with the idea of like, so my truck has got an inverter on it, right? And so what I was doing there about a year ago, because it's out here, like you can't really, like I like dressing up too, right? But it's like, you know what, out here, if you've got the if you're dressing up even for a minute, you're gonna get some serious damage to your clothing. But I think we got a little stall on the screen here. Oh, there we go. Anyway, so on Sundays, I started calling it church, but basically what I would do is it's like, I've got like a corporate wardrobe that I never fucking use out here. Just some nice gear and whatever, because you can't. Like you walk out the fucking door and the first thing you run into is somebody's like got a truck on the side of the road, or somebody's having a bonfire, or somebody's gutting a deer, or something like that. And like, you just can't do it. And I was like, fuck it. I'm going to start dressing up and doing that shit anyways. I don't need these shirts on. Fuck it. So anyways, my plan was to take the inverter, plug it into the laptop, run a hotspot off that, and then just go down to this beach here, because we have cell service in this town. But the best place to get cell service is at this fucking gorgeous beach that overlooks like a fucking epic scope of like, I think you could see about 30, 40 kilometers downstream of this huge thing, and the sun's there and all the rest of it. I was like, you know what? Save that for next time. Fuck it.
There you go. On the topic of language there, it's something I've been thinking about recently as well. We seem to be at the stage where we're compartmentalizing our language as well. Like we're crushing it down into like smaller words and anagrams and like emojis and things like that, right? It's almost like, and then you think of ancient cultures like Egypt and hieroglyphs and whatnot. And I think we're almost like at that point where we're creating this new way of expressing ourselves, almost like a new language that is like more adaptive with the technology that we're all using. And it would be interesting to take a look back in history and see like how that was viewed, like that jump, right? But then you think of like ancient civilizations that get forgotten about for 1,000 years, and then we try to make sense of it. If someone were to take that look back at us at this period of time right now, it would make no fucking sense. It's like, what are these people doing? Like,
totally.
Cap. What is cap? Explain to me cap. What is that?
Oh, for sure. I like the I've definitely thought about that in my practices and stuff, where I had a really great conversation with a guy specifically on Hebrew who he was really well versed, and he was talking about, I guess I could relate it. Okay, so on what you were saying about emojis, right? So like there's symbolism, it has an imbued meaning, and it's partially, depending on how descriptive it is, you can get something that's like a smiley face, okay, that's a fucking smiley face. But you can get something like in Hebrew, and you take a look at the calligraphy involved in that, or Arabic, or in specifically Arabic. Hebrew is a little bit different because you look at it and it doesn't necessarily say something right away. But if you look at Chinese or Japanese, these are very much, and they're very impressionist strokes that infer this thing. Now, some of it's a bit of a reach if you're looking at it for the first time, but some of it's a spot on thing. There's some things that are very obvious. With these, I find like with emojis in the conversation, if you look at the English language, like there's, or runes, another one is a great one is the runes, is that you can spell a word with a rune, but each rune has like a sound, and each rune has a fucking character or a place or a thing. And so now you're not just saying the thing you're saying, it's got a sub story below it if you put it into a chain of meaning, which is interesting if you can connect it to, like I was looking at this one lady I met at a farmer's market. Her old man was the fuck was this? Was it pre-Confucius? At any rate, this guy had done a lot of these really beautiful, and it's just like one word. So it could be just like luck. And luck was a really interesting thing because it looks like a 13 with an old style 3, not the 3, it's a 3, right? And the cross dash into the bowl is like 3 circles. And she was telling me, because I was like, I'm bored, I'm sitting at this farmer's market, I'm trying to sell t-shirts with a guy that's got his face falling off of it, right? Like, I don't exactly fit in with the Christmas market crowd, but fuck it, here I am. So I'm wandering around, and there's this lady, and she's got a stack of these things that her dad made. And so I started flipping through it, and because I'm on this like language trip, I'm like, oh fuck, look at this guy's collection sitting here, right? So I started flipping through it, and she can tell that I actually give a shit, and I'm not just like fucking some idiot. And so she goes, "Do you want me to explain these to you?" I'm like, "I want you to explain every one of them to me." So she gets to this luck one, and it looks like a 13. So there's like a dash 1, and then a 3, and then there's these 3 circles in there. And she starts to explain to me that this is before there was like a communist rising. I might be paraphrasing her very poorly here, but anyways, she said that when this took over in China, so this would be in our lifetime. No, sorry, before our lifetime, in his lifetime, that this regime change had basically changed the way that alphabet was. So if you can think about like us saying you can't say fuck, or you can't say cunt, or you can't say all this shit, like pick a fucking word, right? But we don't have any censored letters. We don't have letters that are removed from the alphabet. So in this thing, this letter had been adapted, which I mean, we've seen in I guess if we went far enough back into English, you'd see where certain letters were combined or conformed, changed in a certain way, or old style, new style, a lot. But this one was that the word luck was like a dash was the 1 was the person. You are the person. You are the character in this. The 3 was like another body, but it was luck. And the 3 circles in the center of the 3, the center one was heart. And that was like a very important part in the essence of what luck was. Luck involving this luck was 2 symbols essentially, but that part in the middle was the one that was for heart. And she said that's not the way they write it anymore. Because of that regime change, they altered that symbol, that they removed the heart of it. And that was like a very important way of not only pinpointing where in time that had happened, because it's such a commonly used thing, and they have so many different symbols and so many different ways of drawing it, that it was interesting to see that kind of removal of a symbol, to take that out, means something to the whole culture that reads it. So there would be, to some degree, purists where they'd say this. Now you try that shit with a fucking emoji and it doesn't fucking fly. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, yeah. Smiley face, eggplant, fucking like, you know what I mean? It doesn't.
I love that you went to the eggplant.
I go right for the jugular, but every fucking time.
I just sit around all day drawing pictures of dicks. I don't know what it is.
I figure it out. I don't know why I do it. So it's just like, I got one. Why? No, like, what? As an artist, it's never been a thing. I always enjoyed it when it's like, the eggplant? Really? Like, I mean, I guess it's whatever. It's what the humans are doing nowadays, I guess.
Well, there's just so many things I don't understand.
And it's okay, Shane. It's okay.
I know, right?
It's okay to not know.
I mean, I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm doing my best. I'm in good spirits about it all. I think that's the most important part, right? Like,
Don't seize up. Don't seize up.
exactly.
Yeah, for fucking sure, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. So what's the origin story? Like up until like say the point that I had met you,
Mm.
where did you come from? Like what was your growing up like?
Ooh, buddy. That's a good one. How do I explain that one? Okay.
I like how you had to stretch.
No, I had to think about that
Here we
one.
go.
The big one. This is like people when they ask me what I do, and I'm like, it'd be easier if I just told you what I don't do. And I'm like, that's a bit cocky. And then, but I was like, I'm not a really good liar, so I have to actually think about stuff. This is the problem about overthinking. Yeah, no, like my mom and my dad met in Cape Breton in like 78, something like that. And then, yeah, we were in Toronto until like about 2005. They went their separate ways, and then we kind of like danced around a bit. And then from that, pretty much from like 1990 up until my last year of high school, there was a lot of jumping around between family members and stuff like that. And anyway, so by the time, Jesus, by the time you and I met, that was like what, 2003? No, we met before that. We met before that, different places. But it was when our mutual friend and I and you and actually I was just telling somebody the other day, I was like, buddy's got this podcast. I was like, you know what these guys used to do? We used to drive to this jam session spot with that other drummer dude, and it was like the whole way there they put a CD on and they would basically scream at each other the whole way there. And I fucking loved it. I was like, these guys sound like fucking gravel pits. It's great. Anyways, so yeah, then I'm actually trying to I've got somebody eventually said you got to write a book, and I was like, oh, okay, I don't know if I could withstand the kind of alcoholism it takes to write an autobiography. That was right around the 30s, and I told myself, I was like, you know what, if you give yourself another decade, you'll have way more material. So my 40th birthday came around, and shit, you know, they were not wrong. So anyways, there was a lot more to it, but the traveling thing happened as a function of moving between family members. My mom being from the East Coast, my dad being from like pretty much Toronto. So a lot of that happened. And then after high school, we came out to BC. My dad stayed out here. I just kept doing it back and forth. And it seemed like every time I was doing it, even my returns to Toronto, Muskoka, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and and then exploring Alberta and all that other stuff. It's like seemed like every time something like that happened, just seemed like there was an opportunity, a thing to explore and check out something else. And having been in Toronto was kind of interesting as a part of that too, because if you're interested, as a friend used to say to me, he's like, interested is interesting. And if you're into something, it can be very compelling, very inspiring. And there were some things that I ran into, and I was just like, you know what? There's a certain amount of, you want to abandon a certain amount of control in everything. And sometimes it's like, you got to grab the wheel for sure. It's going to get heavy. But like outside of that, it's like, hey, sometimes you get a feeling there's like something very, very raw, very real about that like you should definitely pursue. And, sometimes it's heavy and sometimes it's not always so, it's not always fucking sunshine and puppy dogs. Like, get on it, you're gonna have to do it. But the payout is incredible. And so I followed that kind of mental verb for a good long time. I encourage everybody to do it. Every time I get a buddy that's having some problems, I was like, sell everything you own. And if you don't sell everything you own, it's not worth anything. Drag it out in the yard, set it on fire, and then take everything else you have and go on a road trip. Just fucking go. Doesn't matter. Like, I've only done Canada side to side, but I mean, I've been into America a couple of times, and I'm actually, the only thing I'm pissed off about this pandemic, other than the fact that it has a very large body count, is that now I can't go to other countries without having to like have a huge list of whatever in order to verify that I can or can't, or where I'm going to be held and all that other jazz. But that's how that it started with a lot of emotion between family members and everybody at the time too, right? It was kind of interesting to be like a 13, 15-year-old kid in Toronto, like in the 90s. in the 80s, even as an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old, I can remember the completely different stages of what Toronto has become in 2 short decades or even 3 short decades, where we can see like, obviously there's always been sketchy shit everywhere. It's always been around. But man, did it ever seem to like the last bunch of years has really drawn out a completely different culture that Toronto's come into, where, it's not, I would say to some degree, I hate to say it, but yeah, parts of it's gotten way fucking worse. Like way fucking worse. Like there's the amount of violence against children and tense racial arguments has been like the one thing that I've definitely noticed. That's like, I look around, I see it, and I'm like, holy fuck. Like, I know there was shit like that going on since the dawn of time, but like now it's out in the open and seemingly nothing's being done about it. Like, but I mean, of course, there's awesome progress, of course, happening at the same time, which can't be taken out of hand. Like, it's real. And that kind of, I guess, that kind of exploration of those places, those times, and these people, I mean, whatever, not to toot my own horn, I'm a fairly agreeable human being. I'm a decent conversationalist, like get around and but yeah, there's some real tensions that I've seen kind of get a little bit worse, really. And as like a student of communication and definitely interested in propaganda, to see the path that I've kind of chosen, I've somehow maybe I was pretty conscious about it, but I've been in positions where I can sit there and observe, not only be present in what I'm doing, but to see things happening around us on a cultural level. And especially from, if you look at this country from like fucking, you take it from Newfoundland straight out to Vancouver Island, and you see like the development that I've seen in the last 20 years from that much travel. And to interestingly hear the kind of conversation that locals have versus people that live in cities versus provincially, or the conversation of what it looks like from management all the way through our political system. And we're going from like, regional all the way up into provincial, and then above that federal, and those conversations had it. Unfortunately, sometimes it'll drive you to drink.
Sometimes.
Fuck. But yeah, that's been pretty much, that's been, I mean, I could go into detail, but yeah, you'd be fucking here all day. God damn it. Mostly the, I guess the, yeah, no, I think that the origin story for me, man, is like, there was a time where going through the public school system, going to a bunch of different public schools, one of the first things I noticed was like teachers that were really good and teachers that were like just seriously had the shit kicked out of them. Like they just like the administration. And I realized really quickly that, even as a young guy in kind of a rock and roll upbringing, that I was like on first name basis with people twice my age outside of school, and then get into school and then to be on first name basis with the our teachers and the people that take care of our kids most of the day, and then to explore that beyond that and really realize that not to downplay the education system, because almost every system out there is completely fucked. Everything's got a linchpin, everything's got an Achilles tendon for sure. And then there's these really awesome parts of it, and there's things I've learned about things like just admitting when you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. If you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, that's a very important thing to be able to do. One, because if you fake it, somebody will sniff you out, and that's it. You're after that. But also the concept of mentoring and being a what's the word for that? Like, yeah, you're in a mentorship where you're seeking out these things, and there are masters out there and people that are doing that, and just exploring creativity, but also really exploring your own curiosity and finding places where you can find these places. And sometimes, man, you'll get your ass fucking kicked, like for sure. You get stomped, and I mean that figuratively and literally. But like that, outside of those things, there's a certain exploration. Unfortunately, I can also say that that's also squandered, not just squandered, but hunted. Like I've definitely seen that, where like exploring these things where it doesn't matter what it is. It could be your sense of self. In that, in the last 20 years, we've seen that like come into the forefront, where sexual orientation, identity, things like this have been, in some ways, I say it's even been tolerated, because I think that there's some part above a system where it's like it's allowed enough, because if it weren't, it wouldn't be part of it, that kind of thing, where you see like a top-down kind of control. And as somebody that's like stayed pretty much under the radar and definitely done a lot of things side to side without playing into that part, I can say that for sure. There's places where, no, it's not cool for you to do this. And then other places, yeah, okay, you can do this here, but just here. And like, you see what I mean? Like there's those things. Culturally, it happens. And I mean, then you get into theology and religion. And I think if I could give anybody any advice about that, would be just like, watch out for people that, for whatever reason, can't let go of their criticism or fear, broad brushstrokes, fear that their way of life won't exist after they're dead and cold and in the dirt. And I've noticed that a lot. I've seen this, like, where this, and I think the culture in Canada has definitely become way, way, way more accepting about it, which has been fucking great to watch. And seeing it in other countries as well too. There's been some more radical global progress that have moved in those directions. And at the same time, it has there's some dark spots there where it's definitely not. But that we've been able to do that opens up the dialogue. But as a friend of mine would say, especially, how do I say this? It could just be raw as fuck, but where, like, if you think about the construction of culture in the sense that this is just a propagating, a continually evolving, but slowly evolving culture that speaks to our like national identity or things like this. But if you look at it a little bit further, it's also a lot of people trying to preserve a certain way of thinking or being. And most things beyond, like, I'm not going to go full nihilist and say it's like nothing, everything means nothing means everything, or whatever, like that kind of thing. But like, and it's fun for sure. It's super fun to do that, because you could just like unhinge your entire self from something for sure, and then just be like, well, nothing means fucking anything. Well, what's stopping me from doing some horrific act to a group of people? And that's in those places. However, on the other ones, it's like, it's important to have to be able to step outside of that and say, what does that mean to somebody else, to have empathy in these things, especially in these trying times, because now people are getting so fucking bottled up. It's really starting to show itself. And like, I'm sitting in the middle of nowhere, literally in the pretty far afield, and still to turn on the news and see it, it's like, ooh, Jesus, that's like, I imagine somebody, I feel really lucky to have mentors and friends, and to be able to have enough of a filter to know where I can find information, still find challenging people that absolutely do not share, other than the thing that we're not killing each other in that conversation, or hasn't reduced to a fist fight. We can still have this conversation, disagree, and still be like, okay, you can talk, like, and we can have that discussion. And I've seen those other places where it is difficult to have that, but fully worth the risk, like 100% for sure. Not everybody can say that, so I'm pretty lucky on that end where you can do that, but that is definitely a difficult field to explore for sure. Fuck, I'm just rambling on at this point.
Well, I personally think it's always worth the risk. Like that's it's part of why I'm doing this podcast as an example, is just showing that any two people can come together in a conversation. They don't have to agree on everything. And even if they disagree, like that doesn't even have to be a part of the conversation. You know what I mean? Like I listen to people talk all the time, and they're saying things, and then a sentence comes out of their mouth and I disagree with it, but they're still talking, right? And
yep.
There's a part of me that could go, oh, wait a second, I want to stop you there because you're wrong, right? And
right.
People, I think because of online communication, a lot of people are starting to do that these days. that they're not letting people finish their thoughts because we're so used to like the 140 character way of communicating now, that they're not used to expressing themselves in a long form expression, like long form conversation, or to be even given the chance to clarify their meaning of words, right? Because we're playing with a language where a word can mean a lot of different things depending on context, depending on delivery, depending on tone of voice, and especially when this is all in text, there is no tone of voice, there is no delivery, right? All of that stuff is kind of lost. So we're kind of getting away from the idea of like looking at conversations, looking at people, looking at situations as a whole, and just trying to like nitpick, cherry pick little details of it to become offended by or to cheer, or whichever one. And we're kind of we're losing the nuance of the conversation. We're losing the humanity of the conversation. And it's like I jokingly call this podcast Alexandria 2.0 because I love like the idea of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and like that kind of, all of this information was kind of in one place and it kind of went away. Well, we're kind of developing a new version of that with the internet. And there's all these algorithms now watching us. There's all these AI systems watching us. So what I want to do is kind of give it what a human being is. And a human being should be this. It should be two people being able to come together and just tell each other stories, get to know each other, bounce some ideas off of each other without having to be so connected egoically to those ideas that it allows you to hate another human. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, the expression, I think of it as like racism, but on steroids. It's like we've created, while we're trying to fight these forms of bigotry, we've created this bigger form of bigotry that's like almost like it doesn't matter what color your skin are. We're allowed to like just be a cunt to each other for no reason.
This is fine.
Poetic license to do it, and so we have a group of people who will cheer us on if we do it. Like it's almost like it's, you get more of a kickback for liking things than you do for hating things in most social groups, right? Like your friend is like, oh, you know what? I really like the Backstreet Boys. You're gonna rip that dude to shreds, right? But if
why not?
It's like, I really like 9 Inch Nails, and you also like 9 Inch Nails, then suddenly he's a hero. And it's such a strange thing that we're doing to ourselves, where we're removing all the things that make us individuals, while out of the other side of our face creating all these new categories to name ourselves as individuals, right? It's like with every category we create, I feel like we're creating a new box just to stick ourselves in. It was like the big giant box wasn't good enough for us. We need a bunch of smaller boxes because I want my box to be separate from yours. And
sorry to cut you off on that one point. Just that interesting. I do want to hear more what you're saying about that. The idea of compartmentalizing things as we explore other things. It does, by virtue of the way that we go about discussing them, creates its own category kind of thing. So it's like how that explores. And so like, I mean, at the end of it, I always end up going, okay, yeah, well, we're still the same fucking squishy humans. You know what I mean? Like that's what we're doing. And then at the same time, also what you're saying about you doing this podcast, because I've been thinking about doing this myself, as you well might imagine. I have 20 years of fucking traveling the country. I've got a pretty interesting Rolodex. But the interesting thing I've found about just doing this with you over this amount of time was that I remember it being like using the radio, a two-way radio on a forestry road up in Alberta. You gotta have a back and forth. There's like a conversation there, and sometimes the audio cuts out or something like that. We can't just have, we could totally do that. It's a little bit more, I like the fact that you can have a stretch of statements and go into it. Like again, the art of the conversation is like, okay, we're not gonna succumb to our nitpicking on these points. We'll allow the person to think, and the longer that you hear somebody, the more you can tell their discourse, their intonation, things like this. You can go on that and have those, which is, I mean, I've listened to a couple podcasts that it's just interesting, two people just having a conversation and the way they do it. Sometimes they're in the same room, sometimes they're doing great distances. But again, yeah, it is interesting, like you were saying about where we're starting to see how things like this have absolutely explored new grounds that are very similar to the way it's always been. It just has a different media exchange is what we're doing. Now we're doing it digitally. This is it. Again, back to that thing I was saying about like a second renaissance, like my friend was saying about this is like, we got this thing. Now we're ticking off all these boxes and we're adding new information in there, but it's new information that we're now exploring concepts of bigger umbrella statements that we are getting out from underneath of in order to be able to explore, what is this conversation that we're having ultimately about culture. But that, sorry, what were you saying there, Shane? You were saying about just about specifically about conversation and you starting the podcast and the conversation you're having, like going into characteristics of.
Well, yeah, like you, I've been around a lot. I've met a lot of different types of people, and I'm very empathetic. So I don't like division. Even though I can understand that, like, I really, really disagree with what you just said. I'm not holding it against you in a personal way, in any sort of way, and like, even like the topic of the joy, or the lollipop thing. It's like, I don't take lollipops, but I'm not anti-lollipop, and I'm not looking down on anyone who has taken the lollipop. But me presenting myself as being sugar-free gives people this idea, well, he's sugar-free, so he must hate me because I took all of my lollipops, right? And like, all these things, and it's the internet, the technology, the algorithms, all of the social media, all of those things, as well as the media, are all playing into this very propagandic push to make that the new normal, where it's like we're constantly like dissecting each other under a microscope. It reminds me very much of like being in a relationship, and like, most men will understand this. You say a full sentence, and yet they'll like focus on like just a word or two of that sentence,
totally.
and start ripping apart all of your intentions based on a word or two of that, taken out of context of the paragraph. And that's exactly what we're doing to each other as people. And the social media makes it so easy because, we're not communicating back and forth. You can't ask me to clarify what I mean, or you can't tell me that you don't understand what I mean, or something to that effect. Exactly. There is no back and forth. And so I'm trying to like bring that idea back. And what's hilarious is like, I'm constantly pitching people to be on here. And one of the things I'll bump into is like, as soon as someone realizes, well, you and I very much disagree on this thing, so we probably shouldn't talk.
That's the best shit ever.
I'm like, wait a sec. What do you mean we shouldn't talk? First of all, I just gave you a list of like 9 ways in which I admire, respect, and am interested by you. Yeah. Right. And clearly, if I've been paying that much attention, I fucking know we don't agree on that. I still want to have the conversation. The conversation doesn't have to be on that. And if it does end up being on that, I'm still going to be able to look at those 9 other things that I love and respect about you and value those in order. You know what I mean? And like prioritize those within my own self based on my own values. So, like, no, let's still talk. Okay. You think that we shouldn't talk because of that subject? Let's not talk about that. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Let's not talk about that. Right?
That's an interesting one because recently I found myself in a situation where conversation on specifically philosophy and theology with somebody, very close to me, and having that kind of dialogue where it's like, okay, here's a thing. And then if you can reduce it down to having to be able to appreciate somebody else's point of view on something is interesting in the sense that unless it's challenged in the moment, and by that I mean you have to engage with what you believe 100%. So if, like, let's say I'm pretty open to a lot of things. I have some things that I've had some very serious dogs in the fight where I'm like, okay, I have to act now on this thing. Now I become this thing based on my actions, which is its own philosophy as well too. In a conversation where you can have that with somebody else, what you're saying about how a conversation can be had between two people with very, very differing beliefs. And the idea of what a belief is or what you believe in can guide you through your life completely separate from the conversation you're having with somebody. So
I don't think we understand really what we believe, because like a lot of the time, like we can talk, and that's the reason why this is important, is because you can say you believe something, but until you are actually in a situation where that belief requires an action, you can't even guarantee me that you believe that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's a lot of what is missing here, is like, you know, conviction in a belief is something that you demonstrate. It's not just something you talk about on the internet. It's not something you wear as a badge. You know, like if I have the internal belief that men shouldn't hit women, and I see a man hit a woman, I'm going to defend the woman because I have that belief. That's what I believe.
Yeah, there we go.
And therefore that belief is going to become an action. I'm not just going to jump on the internet and just randomly pull up a post like, I don't think men should hit women. Well, of course men shouldn't.
Sure,
people shouldn't have to hit people.
Yeah, well, violence at all, really, at the end of it. But I mean, like, there's a time and a place, right?
Exactly.
Shane, I'll give you a perfect example of this one. It's pretty personal and very close to me, and I don't mind sharing it here because it's no fucking secret. Anyways, a bunch of years ago, 2017 or something like that, a really, really, really close friend of mine, this girl, she got fucking murdered by her jealous boyfriend, brutally. Fucking stabbed her in the neck like 10 fucking times. It's a big, you can Google it. You can find this shit. It's fucking sad. It's actually disgusting and horrible. And anyways, that royally fucked me off for a bunch of years. And it's in the last bunch of years, it's been much easier to unpack. But in the first couple of years, I entertained some very, very crazy ideas. For instance, killing this person. And like fucking I have no qualms about admitting that out loud. But I mean, like, you have somebody that's a very sensitive thing that a lot of people that through that experience, I've learned other people have experienced these other things too. Confusion, just emotional overload with a bunch of things that puts something like that very much in check. And this is something that I've been kind of living with. And then obviously it's a horrible fucking thing to have happen to somebody. And it's obviously a horrible thing that this person did and all these other things. But because I was like so inside my head about these things, it really opened up the way I thought about having even an opinion. So if I have an opinion about something, it's like, okay, well, I believe this thing. But until that time comes, is that left unchecked? That is just an opinion. It doesn't matter. You can say everything up and down all day you like. I don't like the way that thing went down. Of course you fucking don't like all these things. So so going into the details of it, what ended up happening was a friend of mine, a mutual friend that actually I met through my friend that was killed. It just so happened to be that when I made the trip from Toronto out to Cape Breton, that the fucking Supreme Court case was going on in fucking Halifax. And it was some big shit. Like, it was fucking polarizing shit. Like, it was a big story. So anyways, my buddy, she's like, we're going to the Supreme Court case. And I'm like, I don't fucking know if that's such a fucking hot idea for me to be in the room with this fucking guy. Like, I don't know what I'm fucking capable of. And, but I mean, looking back on it now, I was just like confused and a little bit wound tight and whatever, but it wasn't a big deal. And I could see how some other people did just wrought with this conflict of this, tragic, sudden and tragic and brutal loss, and family members and stuff like that. And anyways, point of the story was, so on my way in there, I'm like, okay, well, Supreme Court case, better make sure I don't have a belt on. Better make sure I don't have any sharp things in my pocket. We're going through metal detectors, guaranteed. And then we get in there and there's no fucking metal detectors. And I sat behind the guy that murdered my friend across a knee wall. No wall, no fence, no nothing. I mean, I could have reached over and tapped him on the fucking back of the head. Like, no problem. I didn't even know that that's where I was going to end up sitting. And this guy was sitting right in front of me. And so I'm like staring at this guy and I'm having this like truly sublime moment. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, wow, of all the things I've gotten away with, I could do fucking anything right now. There's like fucking tons of shit. It was a very, very, very surreal moment. And at the same time, observing what's going on, right? There's like, we're in a Supreme Court, we're in a fucking murder trial right now. This is like the last day of it. It's been going on for years. And so anyways, my buddy and I, we leave after that. And she was, obviously, she had a lot of spiritual fortitude about her. And so we went to this restaurant after that and we sat there and we talked about, well, just trying to unpack what it is we just saw. And I was notably pretty pissed about it. And the thing that back to what we were talking about, specifically about having an opinion or having, an opinion unchecked is just that. That's all it is. We're just talking. That's all it is. It's just blah, blah, blah. But it royally unhinged a section of me that was like, what the fuck was there? I was talking with a cousin of mine that knows me very, very well. And she said I should check out some Eckhart Tolle stuff. So I was like, okay. And specifically, Eckhart Tolle was talking about not to just wave his flag all day long, like I'm sitting over there reading everything he's got, but basically he was talking about that specific thing about what we tell ourselves and what we actually do. And so we can have a bigger divide in our personality and in our actions. So it's kind of, and I'm paraphrasing this loosely, the person we tell ourselves we are and the things that we actually do. And the farther you get away from what you have a personality conflict there, because you have one that you're saying and the one that you're doing. It's simple enough at first glance. And I realized that the thing that a younger me had told myself from back in the days when it was like, okay, right, we're not exactly gang related, but we're definitely doing some sketchy shit on the street. That's what we're doing. You fuck with one of me, and I'm definitely coming back to fuck you. And that's the kind of thing. And now that's like a younger me that I've like, it's been a long time since I've entertained these things. And that was in my youth. That wasn't even like, a couple of years ago, like this thing happened. And so as that came to be, I realized that there was a part of me that it was a major conflict. It was this thing that said, okay, there's that guy. Like, I mean, like I could reach over and do something to this dude, like something, like you fucking brutally murdered my friend. Like how am I able to reconcile this? And at the same time, the other side of it was, that is a opinion that I had of myself that I told myself that left with the opportunity to do it right then and there was absolutely not fucking current at all. It had not been updated. I had not actually thought about it until something so jarring that I had to unpack that shit. And sure enough, that was like, now it's like, oh, wow, okay. So that was that part of me. And like a lot of people would say, I would have got hero mode, dude, like for sure. Like that would have been the stuff, like there were the sheriffs in the room clearly picked me out like right away. And I didn't even mean to sit where I was sitting, but the guy looked at me and I was just like, and the guy's like, oh, I'm just going to stand between you two for fucking sure. Like it was a fucking obvious thing. And like, I wasn't going to do anything, but at the same time, I thought about it, obviously you're fucking sitting there thinking about it. But again, and then that, it's a very, a milestone in my life. I mean, how often do you ever do, like, I know a lot of people, fuck man, every time I was in a taxi in Toronto, I would have a conversation with a driver. And some of the fucking shit that I get into a conversation with a taxi cab driver from Toronto, from another country, has told me some shit that I was just like, you know what? I thought I was having a bad day, but holy fuck, way to go. Holy shit. These fucking intense shit. And
we have that phrase for first world problems for a reason, right? And
buddy, I could go.
Yeah, another phrase that I was thought of there is, crisis doesn't develop character, it reveals it. Ooh, and I think that this the joy is a good example of how there's a lot of people out there who hold certain beliefs that they don't hold once it's push come to shove in front of them, such as my body, my choice, right? Like that only applies when we want it to apply, but when we're scared, it doesn't apply anymore, right?
And, this goes out the door.
Yeah, exactly. And that tells you that you don't believe my body, my choice. That's not what you believe. You believe in that maybe, but you don't believe in like the actual statement that you're making. You don't have conviction in it, because if you do, it applies to everything, right? It's the same thing if like, people call you names. I always say like the only names that really hurt us are the ones that are true, right? If you know that like you're being called a name and it's not true, then it doesn't really hurt you. I always use the example of like, I might have told the story before, of like being in high school, making out with a girl, and some guy comes up and calls me a fag. And I'm like, dude, like I'm actually making out with a girl right now,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're with 4 dudes.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of those where if you have this is the one where like I try to, I don't know if I'm using this word right. Like when I'm talking about internalizing my own perspective, um, not just for the feedback loop, because that's important, not to turn it into an echo chamber kind of environment, but to like really be self-critical of myself, and then to be able to see it in other people that are also experiencing the same thing, whether or not they're aware of it or are very aware of it. But that you get a like one of those things like I can say for sure without it being like I, for sure like I am exactly this thing that I see in other people. Like that's timeless fucking philosophy about that, about recognizing things that you don't like because it's about you that you don't like it, which allows you to go a layer deeper and like take a look into these things. And I've seen it myself, and I think one of the more not struggles I've had in the last couple of years, because it's been a little bit more obvious. I don't really engage on that level with people because I'm too busy working on my own thing. I'm seeing it, and then you get a little bit of reflection, and I mean that in the sense like you look at somebody else, you see yourself, not just like thinking about myself. That where the idea that yeah, that like ultimately we're seeing things that like yeah, I it's one of those things where if I could have gotten that earlier in life, where like would that necessarily have meant that I would have improved on my personal character more? But you can't really say that because it just happens in the way that it does. But looking at it from that perspective, it's like, okay, wait a minute, that would this from this point on, we can say that okay, we observe this behavior that is not in sync with what we not only tell internally, but also what we vocalize to other people. And then we have a very interesting kind of path in from a lifetime traveler kind of perspective. It's interesting to see. It's like, oh wow, okay. And I find now that the adventures and the things that I get into now are much more in tune as a result of knowing this thing about myself. And I'm like, I'm not posturing. I'm not making something up to sound cool or to get myself into, unless it is that, because there's always that too, right? Like sometimes you're like, well, I think I might have to put on some bullshit here to get involved in this thing. But let's not make a fucking habit of it, right? Like this is not a career move for sure. But there's always that like infiltrate and destabilize kind of feeling that you get from like back in the day, but like whatever. Um, but yeah, moving into those, it's been interesting to see and to be able to relate with other people about that and seeing well actually like yeah, just back to that whole thing, like I was really stoked that you like invited me in to have this conversation because it is actually super fucking interesting how this conversation about these things contributes to that same thing. Like we're breezing over a lot of like heavy shit, and we're just skimming the surface of some of the things we're talking about. And like if I sat here, if we were having a conversation that wasn't being recorded, and it was you and me spitballing, and you're sitting here firing up Wikipedia article after Wikipedia article, going into length and detail about every one of these things, there's a lot of we would find an incredible amount of it, and the more that it contributes to it, I feel like the better. And it's been, if it were anything else, I'd have been like, well, what the fuck would I even talk about? But because other people that I've seen um, live by example in these things, and like you and I, we're just fucking around with this shit, really, honestly. Like if we're looking at it in some other, when you're standing in the presence of power, like that's just it. It doesn't have to be a tyrannical power. It doesn't have to be a submissive power. There's all forms of them out there. But when you're in the place of it, you're like, okay, fuck, this feels like something like that. And not everybody gets that opportunity, and maybe it's few and farther between for others, but that it's out there has been definitely like a driving force for me, and I'm sure for you as well too. Like that's a fucking let me just make this as dumb simple as I possibly can.
Well, I mean, a lot of it, like a lot of different things we've talked about, and like you said, we've talked about a lot of things and touched on, glossed over, and yeah, we could go into a deep dive on any one subject, but that's
fuck it.
that's not
Let's
what
do
that's
that,
not how
man.
conversations really work. But you know, even a lot of it has to do with balance, right? Like if you think of when you were talking about the burning and then the flooding, the hot and then the cold, all of this stuff is like when things get off of balance, there's a natural reaction to push it a little bit too hard back the other way. Sure. And then some type of balance comes from there. And we're kind of at that place right now where things had fallen off of balance in one direction so far that we're all like fighting to shove it back in the other direction. And we've put way too much force on it now. So now we're going to have to like figure that out and bring it back into some type of balance. And that's true with a lot of things. And what is required out of all of this stuff is to like be a little bit humble and definitely open. And reminds me of another comment I wanted to make. I moved a lot too. I went to 14 different public schools. So the idea of
holy
like
shit, you fucking trumped me. Oh my fuck. 14. Oh my fuck, dude. Are you shitting me right now?
No, for real. I could just on a moment.
I thought it was fucked up that I went to 10. And like, I don't know anybody. You have seriously gonna like I can't go back in time and fuck this up, but like
3 high schools on top of that. But anyways,
holy shit, son. Fuck,
what I learned really quickly is there's good teachers and there's bad teachers. There's good teachers and there's bad teachers, but there's also good students and there's bad students, and you have to be teachable. Common conversation about me was that I was like I was always challenging, but I was always paying attention. Right? Like
I got that.
I was challenging, but I was always listening. I was always taking in what they were saying. And sure. I think that's important. And I think like, when we say lead by example, it's one thing I love about you and all the other people that I bring on to have these conversations about is that, we're out there walking our talk. It's not just a belief we hold on the internet. And we might not all believe the same things. And that's not, that's kind of part of the fun, right? And being humble enough to understand that we might be wrong is why we all get along so well.
There's that it came up in conversation recently about my mom was Protestant and my dad is let's just say he's living the Buddhist life, and he was into it big time when I was about 10. And as a result of having those two kind of theologies as a kind of a brick and mortar part of my life, and seeing, obviously accepting a whole bunch of other ones from everybody else around me. But the idea that, what was it? I think it was, it's a Dalai Lama or something like that. It's like somebody challenged him saying, like, what would you do if you found some other religion or some other thing that better explained how you see the world and live in the world? What would you do? And the guy's like, well, I'd just change. And it's like that can be a very terrifying and threatening thing, because so many things are, we again back to actions and beliefs, and that can be like, oh shit, I might actually have to change that thing or something like that. And I think it can happen unwillingly and it can happen willingly at the same time, and these things are ongoing. And being able to do this kind of thing, I was like, dude, I'm pretty sure, I don't know what it is. We're not doing this on this video, but I will dig. We're going to find something that we don't agree on, that we should do that. Like, you know what? Let's have this email exchange. Let's find the shit we don't get along on, and like, let's royally fuck with each other.
No, we should. I think it'd be fun to come back. We'll come back next month and we'll do one of these where we've hammered out this. All right, let's fight. Round one.
Yeah, buddy. Let's get into some shit.
But for now, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. I love you, man. It's been way too long since we've got to hang out and burn things together. And
oh fuck! I love that.
But hopefully that day will come again. Hopefully, my sugar-free ass will be allowed to even get on a plane or a train to come within my own fucking country again one day, right?
Listen, I don't want to make it weird or anything like that, but I know people that put people in trunks. We could just have you shipped across province lines. It'd be no problem, man. We'll just get food, get in there with a jug of oil and some fucking noodles.
We'll talk when it's not incriminating, and everything you just said was allegedly, okay? Allegedly.
No. It's friends. Yeah. It's just me like, oh wait, what am I saying? Fuck.
All right, brother. Well, we'll say goodbye to everybody at home, and
see you later, people.
Yeah, I'll end the recording.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.